Hey guys, it's Brandon from Pixel Planet Studios. The other day, I was chatting with Sergey, and guess what? He left his YouTube password out in the open. So I thought I'd jump on his channel to show you how to create and rig a gauge like this from scratch. This can be super useful if you're doing a project like I had with a ton of gauges that needed to be animated. If I didn't rig them with expressions, it would have been almost impossible to do this much animation. And if you don't want to do any of the work or just want to look over the project files, there's a link down in the description. And let's just say that Sergey's password isn't the only thing I stole. Stick around to the end of the video, and I have a couple free things that I'm going to be giving away. So I'm going to start by making a little controller layer, and I'm going to make a little shape layer down here, and I'll give it a stroke of like 2 and make it transparent. And we'll make this a guide layer so that it does not render. And I'm going to maybe call it input. And I'm going to create 2 sliders on here, and I'll call this segments. And I'll duplicate this, and I will change the second one to be called gap width. So I'm going to make a circle in the middle of the screen, and I'm going to make sure it's a circle, not an oval, and maybe size it up here. And I'll make the stroke width something like 66. We're in a 1080 comp for this. And I'm going to add a trim paths to this. And so basically we have 180 degrees to play with this, but this goes by percentages. So we have 50%. And if I offset this to -90, this is kind of the general shape of our gauge. So I'm going to go in here into the end, and I'm going to create a couple variables. And I'm actually going to pull this input layer, and I'm going to lock this effects panel. So the first variable we're going to make is going to be called segments, and that's going to be equal to this segments amount. And then we're going to make another one and call it gaps, and that's going to be equal to segments minus 1. And that's because if there's 7 segments, there's going to be 6 gaps in between. And then we're going to make another one called gap width, and that is going to be equal to this other slider. And then segment width, which is going to be equal to 50. I'm going to put this in parentheses. So this is going to be equal to 50 for the 50% we had, minus gaps times gap width divided by the total amount of segments. So basically, however many gaps we have and whatever the gap width of that, we're going to subtract that from our 50%. And then we're going to divide that remaining space over how many segments that we have to find out what the width is of each individual segment. And finally, what we really want to see in this trim paths is that segment width. So I'm going to write that right here, and that's going to return this variable that we already established. And if I click off, there is an error. And let's see, if I look at this, segment width divided by 0. Oh, okay. So this error is because we said our number of segments was 0, and actually we want our number of segments. We're going to start with 7, and our gap width maybe we'll make like 0.9. And so here you can see if we had 7 of these, this would be the right spacing. We can't quite see it yet, but we will soon. And I'm going to change this offset back to 0, and we're going to rotate the whole shape. So if I go in here into the transform of the ellipse, we're just going to rotate this -90 degrees. So now, we kind of have this origin that's going to come around here. It'll just make everything a little simpler. So I'm going to go ahead and change this shape to shape_01. And this is going to be kind of our level 1 on the left. So let's come in here into the offset of the trim paths. So that's currently set to 0, and increasing this we'll move this along here. So I'm going to alt click on this stopwatch for offset and add some more expressions. So I'm going to use a split expression here, and I'm going to type in this layer dot name dot split, and then in parentheses I'm going to tell it to split at the underscore, and then I'm going to type a 1 in brackets. So if you know how an array works, if we go back up here to the name of the shape layer, we're telling it to split at the underscore. The first thing that it returns would be 0. So if we typed 0 in the bracket, it would return the word shape. And if we type 1, it will return 0, 1. So 0, 1 is what we want, and that's why we're typing 1 in the bracket. And so we can see proof of concept. If that's working, we see offset is set to 1. And if I change this to shape 02, the offset is set to 2. So let me change this back to 1. And I'm going to copy all of these other expressions down into the offset. And let me scroll down and open this so we can see everything. And I will make this into a new variable, and I'll call it this segment. And that is now another variable that we can use. And then I will, in parentheses, write this segment minus 1. So in this case, since this segment returns a 1, we'd be returning 0. And then we're going to multiply that by segment width plus gap width. Okay, so when we have the second one, it will return 1, and we will be rotating around and moving the distance of the segment width plus the gap width. Okay, so let's see what that looks like when we duplicate this. And it's not quite working. So if we look at this next one, it did move, but it only moved a little bit. And this doesn't work because the segment width and gap width are percentages, but we need to convert this to degrees. So obviously the conversion is 100% equals 360 degrees. So we're going to multiply this by 3.6. And now if I duplicate this, you'll see that this next one spaced appropriately. And if I keep duplicating this, we should be able to have 7 that space appropriately. And you can see now we can increase this gap width, and if we increase the amount of segments to 8, all of these will get a little smaller, and we can duplicate this one, and now we have 8 segments. So I'm going to go back to our 7 right here. Okay, so now I'm going to make kind of a arrow in the middle of the screen. So I'm going to start with a circle, and maybe convert this to just a Bezier path, and kind of make it into a shape that we're kind of comfortable with. Okay, so the rotation of this we want to be controlled by the gauge percentage. So we're going to open up the rotation, and I'll just call this arrow. And basically, if the gauge percentage is at 0, we want this to be negative 90. And if it's at 100, we want it to be 90 degrees. And so the easy way to do this is with the linear expression. So I'm going to type linear, and the first thing in the parentheses is going to be what is driving the linear function. And so I'm going to pick whip it to this gauge percentage. And then basically we're going to tell it that if that is 0 being the base of it and 100 being the top threshold, that the rotation of this should be negative 90 and 90. So 90 correlates with 100 and negative 90 correlates with 0. And so if I click off of this, you'll see that this is now, if I go past 100, it stops here. And if I go less than 100, it also stops. So let me just set this back down to 0. And so now we have the arrow being driven off of this. Okay, so now I've added some color to each one of these, just in their stroke color. So I want the arrow to follow whatever color it's pointing to. So I'm going to copy all of my expressions from, let's steal them from offset, and I'm going to put them into the fill color. The fill color. I'm going to alt click and paste this. It's not going to do anything right away, and I'm going to delete everything except for segments, and I'm going to pick whip gauge percentage and make this a variable as well. Percentage. And then I'm going to make one more variable. I'm just going to call it P, and I'm going to say P equals 100 divided by segments. So P is going to give us what percentage of the entire range that each segment takes up. We're kind of going to ignore gaps for now, because if the arrow is pointing into a gap, we want to kind of ignore that and split the difference. So halfway through the gap would be, one color, halfway would be the other color. So, if it's pointing towards a gap, we don't want it to like go gray during that time. And then we're going to do an if-then statement. So we're going to say if the gauge percentage is greater than or equal to P times 0, and gauge percentage is less than P times 1, it should return the stroke color of our first segment. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find this stroke color. So I'm going to pick whip down to this stroke color. And if I let off, it's now saying that if this gauge percentage is greater or equal to the range that this would start in, but less than the range that it would end in, then to make it the color of the stroke of our first shape. And so we're going to create our next part of this, and we're going to say else if, and it's going to basically be the same thing. So we're going to kind of copy and paste this in here, and we're going to say else if gauge percentage, and we're going to change this to 1 and 2. So we're saying now if it's within kind of this range, look for the stroke color of shape 2. And we're just going to kind of keep doing that. And we're going to call this 3, and this should be 2, 3. So we can kind of paste this a few more times if we want. I'm not sure how many we need. So here's shape 1, 2, 3. We're going to make this 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then we're going to make sure we change all of these. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we're going to come to these, and this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And again, what this is saying, so this P that we said is 100 divided by the amount of segments. So what this is saying is that if the gauge percentage is set to 0, if it's between 0 and I guess about 14%, so whatever 100 divided by the total amount of segments that we have, it will be the first color. And so it's kind of to see a percentage and what segment that it would line up with. And so at the end of this, I'm going to say, I'm just going to say else, and then we're going to give it a gray value. So if I kind of come in here, let's go to maybe our character panel, and I find just like this gray color I want it to change. Okay, it's going to be 45, 45, 45. So if we ever want to copy and paste a value like that, what we need to do is convert it from that hex value that we just copied into an RGB value. So we're going to come in here to color conversion, and we're going to use hexToRgb. And the hex string is what I just pasted. And actually these need to go in quotations. And now if I end this, you'll see that this might be working. So here we're in red, here we're in orange, yellow, and yeah, it's working based off of the percentage. And if we go past that amount, you'll see that it turns gray to kind of let us know that it's not working. Another thing I did is increase the stroke width if it's hovered over. So how I did that, we're gonna paste this most recent expression, and we're gonna come into the stroke width of our first shape, and I'm going to paste this, and I'm gonna find our this segment from further down the list, and that's the one where we figured out what segment it is based off of the layer name. So if I come in here, I'm going to paste this here at the bottom. And so I'm going to delete most of these else if statements, and it's going to say that if the gauge percentage is greater or equal to this p-value times, and in parentheses we're going to type this segment minus 1, and then this side is going to be this segment. And if that's true, the value is going to increase by 14. So I'm going to type value plus 14, and that'll allow us to kind of individually control what size stroke that we want, while also being able to just increase it a standard 14 amount. So if I click off it, I guess I need to change this. So else is just going to say value. So basically what it's saying is keep the current value of what the stroke width is, unless the arrow is at a rotation that is pointing at this. So if I click off, you'll see that if I rotate over this, the stroke width increases a bit, just to kind of emphasize that we're on top of this. So this expression can be copied and pasted to all of these, because we don't need to individually change the expressions, since we told it to look at which segment that we're dealing with. So we did this segment minus 1, which is kind of like the starting point right before the segment, and then we did this segment, which would be kind of the top end of it. So if I copy this stroke width, I can search for stroke width on all of these other shapes, and I can select all of these, and I can paste them. And now if as we rotate, each one of these will scale up accordingly. And the last thing I had was some text that automatically changed based on the rotation. So it would be easy to make this kind of like a percentage. So let's find that. I'll type, maybe number down here. And this is actually going to be pretty easy. We're going to go into the source text and parent this to gauge percentage. And in our example, we did something a little different, but I'm going to say maybe use that and add percent to it. So as we rotate through this, it automatically says kind of the percentage number that we're looking at. And maybe I'll change the font. I just want to make sure that we'll be able to kind of see it. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add this gauge percentage to Essential Graphics. And obviously this could be really useful if we're going to use this in Premiere, but we're actually going to use it for a different purpose. And so let's see, I'll call this gauge, and maybe set this to 0. And so now, instead of exporting it as a motion graphics template and making a Mogert, we're going to drop this into a new comp, and maybe I'll have a couple of these. So So I'll duplicate this. So, this is really useful for a project where we have kind of a whole bunch of different gauges. If I go down here into the essential properties, I can change each one of these. So I can, animate these from, 0. This one maybe goes to 100, and you see the one thing here is that I have all these decimals. So actually I should come back into here and add math.round and put this, actually I'll put this around this, and then we add percentage to it. So now if I go back here, you'll see that this is working. And actually it looks like if we go to 100%, this stays gray. And that's also something we can fix. So maybe if we go back into here, we're going to say if, so we said that if it's less than kind of the maximum of this. So I'm going to add, I'm going to just change this to less than or equal to. And I guess I can do the same thing. And so yeah, this is greater than equal to. So this should work. But if we go all the way to 100, which I never did in my real world example, this should now work. So let's go back here and you'll see that, yeah, the green, if we go past that, it turns gray. But if we type in 100 here, we are all good. And yeah, 0 still returns red. So this is a nice way, if we need to make a ton of these, instead of making a bunch of pre-comps that each one has a different value, we can have one pre-comp and be able to animate each one of these. And that's using essential properties. So I know we tend to think of essential graphics as something to use in Premiere, but it can be really useful in After Effects, because think about the time to duplicate all of these and tell it what percentage you want it to go up to. It's a lot easier this way to only have to make one and then adjust it with an essential property.
Brandon, normally I'd be pretty upset about someone hacking our YouTube channel, but I gotta say that was a great tutorial, so I'll give you a pass this time. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to check out Pixel Planet Studios for more awesome content.
Well, I'm glad Sergey wasn't too mad about that, but wait until he hears about this. You know his amazing tool, SmartRect? If you don't, it's a script that takes the rectangle tool in After Effects to the next level. Well, while I was in the Ukramedia account, I may have found a few copies of SmartRect lying around, and I'm going to be giving them away free on our channel. You're also going to have a chance to win the grand prize of all 25 of Ukramedia's tools. And I'll also be showing you how to use some of my free After Effects tools alongside SmartRect to take your automations to the next level. Check it out.